It's a real pleasure to see so many people here for this terrific event. We're at Columbia University, and if you've looked at the letterhead of Columbia University or any formal documents of Columbia University, you'll know that the full name of this institution is Columbia University in the city of New York. And we here at SIPA take the last name of the university in the city of New York very seriously. There's nowhere at the university that the in the city of New York part of Columbia's name is as important and as lived as fully on an everyday basis. And that's why I'm so delighted to be opening up this event with Deputy Mayor Caswell Holloway. But to introduce the Deputy Mayor, my job is actually even easier than it would be if I had to introduce Cass, and that is to introduce my colleague, Esther Fuchs. Esther, as many of you, if not all of you know, is one of our most active and distinguished faculty members here at SIPA. She's a professor of public affairs and political science here at Columbia, a longtime friend and colleague here at Columbia, one of the world's great experts on urban affairs and urban politics. She literally wrote the book on city budgets. And in addition to that, she is what I like to think of as the model SIPA faculty member. She's not only a great scholar who's added tremendously to our knowledge of urban politics and policy, but she's a practitioner. She spent several years working for Mayor Bloomberg as a special advisor in his first term as mayor. And we're thrilled that she's come back to SIPA since then, enriched by her experience in City Hall. And to help us build what is rapidly becoming really the finest program in urban politics and policy anywhere in the country. So I'm really happy to introduce Esther Fuchs, who's going to introduce our speaker. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert. That was the nicest introduction I've gotten since my mother introduced me at my non-bat mitzvah. I didn't really have one, but and I think this is our dean's virgin voyage as being dean, so I want everybody to welcome the new dean of the School of International and Public Affairs, Robert Lieberman. Well, it's my personal pleasure to introduce Caswell Holloway. I like that. Caswell Holloway, New York City's current Deputy Mayor for Operations, who will speak today on Inside Operations Managing New York City. When Mayor Bloomberg appointed Cas last August to arguably the most important position in city government, New York City was still reeling from the national economic downturn, and public confidence in government, including city government, was at a low point. I always thought Mike Bloomberg was smart, but his appointment of Cas was clearly the best thing he's done in his third term. No laughs? No nothing? And I think the mayor would agree with that characterization. What a turnaround. Deputy Mayor for Operations is one of those jobs where you are on call 24/7 and people only notice you if something catastrophic goes wrong. Cas oversees 11 mayoral agencies and offices, assists the mayor in overseeing the police department, fire department, Office of Emergency Management, Office of Management and Budget, and Office of Labor Relations. And some of the commissioners and former commissioners from those departments are here with us sitting in this room today, so I know they'll keep Cas honest, especially former Parks Department Commissioner Henry Stern, who needs a special warm welcome from all of us here. In a city as complex as New York, commissioners must be given considerable authority and responsibility to run their agencies. But without a strong deputy mayor for operations who coordinates services, encourages innovation, and holds commissioners accountable, the city would not function. Cas has already proven himself in this position. And part of the reason Cas's success happened is he comes with experience in government. Kaz has served as the commissioner of the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, where he worked to implement the Mayor's Plan NYC, which is the blueprint for sustainability. And in that job, he created an energy team and reorganized DEP's capital projects, and most importantly, in my view, initiated the Water for the Future, a $2 billion package of investments which repairs the Delaware Aqueduct and ensures the reliability of the city's water supply. Thank you, Kaz, for doing that. Before that, Kaz served as Chief of Staff and Counsel to Deputy Mayor for Operations Ed Skyler and as Special Advisor to Mayor Bloomberg. I can't think of a better way to have trained for his current position. And for those of you who are looking for Kaz's private sector experience, well, he was an associate at Debevoise and Plimpton and Cravath, Swain and Moore, and he served as a law clerk to Judge Dennis Jacobs. And oh yes, he graduated from Harvard College with honors and from the University of Chicago Law School. I know I should have known that you had that Chicago connection. Being an old Mayor Daley file myself, we know what strong government is about. I should also add that my personal pleasure has been to serve with Kaz on the Mayor's Sustainability Advisory Board. We are really so delighted, Kaz, to welcome you to SIPA today. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Deputy Mayor of the City of New York for Operations, Caswell Holloway.
Well, thank you, Esther, and wow, now I really feel like I have to deliver. Actually, from that long list, which I guess 29T, the trouble is the charges are true. That's one of the rules that Henry Stern taught me at the Parks Department. But I think the best training that I received for the job I have now probably came from the 3 years I spent at the Arsenal working for Henry Stern. So everything I know about managing New York City, as this is styled, I guess you can attribute to him. So if you don't like what you hear, I can give you an email address. In any case, it is an honor to be here. Esther, thank you very much. Dean, thank you. It is really to speak to a group that is this talented, committed, and really interested in the issues that the city faces, both the exciting ones that are objectively exciting, and some people, that all differs, but even the unsexy ones, the budget, solid waste management, the things that are so vital to running city operations, but that people don't talk about every day. So I'm going to take advantage of that and go through as much as I can. But the first thing I do want to say is I was a little daunted by, and we did debate a little over what to call this presentation, Managing New York City. As Esther said, Mayor Bloomberg, first of all, is the boss. And he has a stable of very strong commissioners, Bob Lamondre among them, who is here. And he also expects those commissioners to run their agencies and to carry out not only their functions, but think about strategically where they're going to go. And that's the great thing about working for Mayor Bloomberg. He really does empower his commissioners and his deputy mayors to move things forward and explain. And if you make a case for it and you can explain why it's necessary to do it, even if it's politically unpopular, even if it's not going to generate immediate results, you will have unwavering support. That's why it's kind of easy to take on difficult challenges for this mayor, because at least you know whether it's the Delaware Aqueduct, which I'll talk a little bit about, or some other thorny issues that you deal with, that if the mayor is behind you, then he's going to be behind you all the way. And that is something that is not in the short term, not if an article gets written in the paper that turns, that isn't very good, which happens every single day. And I guess the other thing Esther said, look, I mean, people only really notice operations if something's going wrong. And so my job overall is probably to draw as little attention to myself as possible. And if I had to boil down being deputy mayor for operations to a single description, it would be that It's really the position that teaches you that there is no season of the year left to like, right? I mean, it's either too hot or too cold or too windy or too rainy. All of these things cause huge problems, and you really just want to sit in a windowless room and wait until the next day when you hope that the sun's going to be shining. But even then, something could go wrong. Bob Lamondre, I don't know what it could possibly be, but every now and then the unexpected happens. So what am I going to cover here? I have an agenda, an overview. I just want to talk a little bit about the fiscal constraints that we face, because I think the budget right now, the economic situation in New York City is driving everything. And the good news is that the economic situation has gotten marginally better. New York City went into this recession later than the rest of the country and has come out a little bit sooner, but we still face massive fiscal problems and uncertainty, and I'm sure as many people here would be quick to point out, and I'm sure they will when I'm finished, so I'm not sure how much time I'm going to leave for Q&A. There are a lot of big problems that we need to tackle. The good news is that the mayor and the governor, I think, are really working together in an unprecedented way, whether it's on teacher evaluations or pensions, to do that. But the question remains, how much success will be made and what will it mean? I thought I'd talk a little bit about the overall way that I look at the operations of the city. I guess that's the managing part. And then rather than go through a laundry list of everything going on, I thought I'd just walk through a couple of illustrations and show how some of these issues, and particularly through the prism of energy in particular, all of the issues of public safety, infrastructure, sustainability come together and present really unique challenges that we think about at City Hall and that you should be thinking about too. So just starting with the fiscal picture, we put out the mayor's preliminary budget just 2 weeks ago. For fiscal 13, it's almost $70 billion. The city-funded portion is $50 billion. Many of these expenses are beyond the city's control, the most significant of those being pensions. It is, no matter what else you can say about whatever we've managed over the last 10 years in terms of the mayor's fiscal stewardship of the city, one fact is true, and that is that pensions have gone from $1.5 billion as a share of the city's budget to over $8 billion. And that level of growth is simply unsustainable. Now, there is a Tier 6 proposal on the table. We'll see how far it goes in terms of real reform of the system. But this is a critical issue. The more of the city's budget that these kinds of costs eat up, the less resources there are for everything else. Unless you're going to raise taxes or raise revenues. And one of the key things that we're trying to do, and if you ask me what is the question that I think about every day, well, first I hope nothing goes wrong. But really, seriously, for long-range planning, I think about, why do people want to live in New York City? And this really gets to the framework of how I think about operations. We can really break it down into 4 areas. Public safety and customer service. I put those two things together because they really embody the foundation on which anybody, whether they're a family or a business, will decide to come and live in New York City. Is it safe here? Is it clean here? Is there good drinking water? Are there good public services? Are there good roads? Can you get things done? Can you build stuff? Or do you have to wait for 45 days to get an electrical inspection? These are the questions and the fact is, you don't have to live here. You can live somewhere else. America is a great country. You can move anywhere. You can move to New Jersey. You can move to Connecticut. You can move to California. And we want as many people to come and live here as possible. Now, New York City taxes are already high. The higher they get, the less competitive New York City is. And so, at a certain point, and if you look at revenue streams over the course of the last 10 years, property taxes have gone up. Other revenue sources have gone up, and that means that it costs more relatively to live in New York City. Now, in some ways, you pay for what you get, and I think the city services are very, very good, perhaps unrivaled. We're also at a moment in time where we're at historic lows in crime, started under Mayor Giuliani. But under Mayor Bloomberg, we've seen a 54% reduction even from the Giuliani years in major crime categories. Streets are cleaner than ever. Water infrastructure is great. The basic services that New Yorkers expect, I think, are in a good place, and this is at a time of diminishing resources. We've actually gone through 11 rounds of budget cuts, and one of the ways that we balanced the budget, the preliminary budget going for fiscal 13, was doing another $1.5 billion, what all you budget wonks or SIPA wonks would call PEG, Program to Eliminate the Gap. That's a combination of cuts and revenue enhancements, but I can tell you for the most part it's cuts. And so public safety, customer service, and on the customer service side, that really gets to the core of Mayor Bloomberg's management philosophy, which is he really brings a customer-oriented perspective to city government in a way that I personally find unique. When I went to be commissioner of DEP, it's a great agency. It actually has 6,000 people who work for it, highly skilled, most of them. I'd say the intellectual capital there is really high, and they're extremely dedicated. They really had this idea that, they work for the system, that they are employees of the, maintenance and stewards of this infrastructure, which is immense. One of the things that I tried to do while I was there was say, no, actually, you have 8.5 million customers, and you have a boss, and that's the mayor, and we have to figure out how we're going to make services for customers better. And it was a reorientation that I think, on one hand, was motivating, but two, really made us think differently about, we were always saying to people, well, look, we're not going to allow dry wells to happen because that's less convenient from an infrastructure perspective, but it costs a lot more money in terms of developing things, and it actually disincentivizes things we want, like green infrastructure. So, you have to think about things from that perspective. Then there's infrastructure and human capital, and the mayor has said, we're not going to walk away from the infrastructure investments that we need to make, like that seemed to happen in the 70s, and I think he's really backed that up. I'll go through some examples. Then sustainability. And as Esther said, Plan YC, the sustainability blueprint, this is more than just pro-environmental public policy planning. I think the breakthrough of Plan YC and the Bloomberg administration is to bring front and center the proposition that environmental and resource stewardship and economic development are not a zero-sum proposition. It's not one or the other. They go together. And in fact, sustainable/livable city is a city where people want to come, and that is going to feed economic development if you do it the right way. But you have to be willing to engage in the tough trade-offs. You're not going to be able to go all one or all the other. And then there's innovation and efficiency. So let me go to just a couple of examples. When we talk about customer service, and this is with basic city operations, and I didn't even know Bob was going to be here, so this slide was in the deck before I knew, but I'm really glad. But Bob is really has really embraced the mayor's philosophy of governing. What we have done at the Department of Buildings, the Department of Buildings has had a history that I guess you could describe as storied. There have been various periods where numbers of people have been taken out of the building in handcuffs and so forth. I think first and foremost, Bob has led the way in really shoring up the integrity and the morale of the agency. But now, as we've gone through this difficult economic time, Bob has taken advantage of some commercially available off-the-shelf technology to basically bring many of his key operations online so that you can actually mark up plans remotely, get agencies together remotely so that there's no more excuse or that agency ping pong. If you try to build something in this town, you can go to the buildings department and say, here's my permit, and say, well, I can't actually issue this to you until you go to Lefrak City to get your water connection permit, and to get that you have to go to Worth Street, and then you have to go to Midtown on Broadway. I know this because I've been to all these offices. And that's crazy, and it's no way to run a railroad, so let alone the best city in the world. So Bob really has done this, and one of the mayor's big commitments now is for us to reduce inspection times from 35 and 45 days to 10 days for all new development. So when I look at operations, whether it's the Department of Buildings or the Department of Environmental Protection, we are looking at all operations where we have customer-facing interactions. If you have to do business with the City of New York to do your business, We want to make that easier to do. And I guess as a what's the guiding strategic principle there? Shifting the burden. For too long, it's been that one agency says, I've done my job, now you have to make sure that the other agency does its job. And in this day and age, with simple technology and this particular mayor with the customer service-oriented focus, it really should be on the city to get our act together. You know, if it requires 17 permits to open a restaurant, and it does, or 17 permits/inspections, then the individual entrepreneur who has demonstrated the financial wherewithal to open that restaurant shouldn't have it to the burden shouldn't be on them to do every one of those transactions themselves. So we're working on fixing that. Let's turn to infrastructure. This is a map that is near and dear to me. It shows New York City's water supply, and we bring about 1 billion gallons of water in a day from the Catskill and Delaware watersheds. We're also going to be filtering water from the Croton watershed there for the small price of $3.5 billion. But in the middle here, there is a problem. There is a leak. In fact, there is water that has been leaking out of there since about 1991 at the rate of 35 million gallons a day. Now, I focus on this project because I think it epitomizes Mayor Bloomberg's approach to infrastructure investment and running the city overall. This is a problem that people have known about but haven't really wanted to deal with. Why? Because it's expensive. It's far away. It's actually out of the city. I don't know if any people here have visited some of the small towns that are out of the city, but they're not exactly like the 5 boroughs. And I have actually formed relationships with the county executives and some of the people there. It is a totally different mentality and political environment, and they also have some unique views about New York City. You may not know this, but in fact, to build some of these reservoirs, we actually had to help people to relocate, and I'm putting that euphemistically. So anyway, you can understand why there is this kind of long-term tension, but worse for us, what this leak is, you know, there's no indication that this leak anytime soon is going to become something catastrophic, but it could, and it needs to be fixed eventually. And in fact, if that happens, since this is bringing roughly half our water supply to the city, if we suddenly didn't have access to 500 million gallons of water, and we go through about 1 billion gallons a day. I don't know if you read the New York Post the day after the Super Bowl, but there was an article about Flushing, and it is true. You can tell when halftime is based on the level of the Hillview Reservoir, which I thought was one of the most interesting things I learned as commissioner of that agency. Bottom line, you know, we made the case to the mayor that while there was no imminent risk, that long-term we had to make the investment now to fix this. And what did that mean? That meant at a time where water rates have gone up for 15 consecutive years, we had to make an additional $2 billion investment. And that is what it is going to cost to fix this. Now, in terms of setting milestones and getting things done, the only thing the mayor asked me after we made the case was how are we going to make sure that our successors can't turn us back. Well, as Henry Stern will tell you, you can never guarantee that, but one of the ways you can try is to get a shovel in the ground. So we are going to break ground on the shafts for this site by 2013 before the mayor walks out. We've also promised so many things to the towns up there that I think it's going to be a little politically difficult for people to run out. And at the end of the day, we're also putting in a consent order. So hopefully it's going to be locked in. Now, on the other side of infrastructure is going into the sustainability area, but it's a combination of sustainability and infrastructure, is the Green Infrastructure Plan. One of the things as deputy mayor that I guess I bring to the table is enough knowledge to be dangerous, but not so much that I've seen it all before and, you know, there's nothing new under the sun. And so I will ask occasionally, why are we doing that? And this is one of the areas where that was the question. What is that? Well, there's a problem in New York City. When it rains, our old sewer system becomes overwhelmed and sewage dumps into our waterways. You might, if you go look it up on YouTube. This is a big problem. It's a water quality problem, and we have to fix it. Now, there are a couple ways you can do it. You can build big gray infrastructure, tanks and tunnels to hold this stuff. Or you can do what the Green Infrastructure Plan seeks to do. It's kind of new technologies using green roofs, blue roofs, porous pavement, and bioswales to make the street bed and the rooftops more permeable so that you can capture stormwater and have it drain into the sewer system at a rate that it can handle. Now, this is untested. So it was new stuff for the state government and the federal government who regulate us. But probably the biggest cultural change we had to make was at DEP. DEP actually really likes building this stuff, stuff that's billions of dollars and big gray pipes. And in fact, internally at the agency, the biggest battles that we fought, or I would say collaborative discussions that we had, was over whether or not we could give credit to home builders and developers for green infrastructure and dry wells and infiltration technology that traditionally we had not given credit for, because it's much easier and more secure from the agency's perspective to hook up the pipe and make sure that the pipe continues to carry water. So we've taken on some additional risk as a city in terms of regulating what's going to happen here, and we're setting standards and guidelines for design. But I think this just shows where it's not just about coming up with something innovative. Implementing it requires both regulatory change, change out in terms of the stakeholders and developers in the city, but most of all, I think sometimes within the agency itself. This is also going to require a degree of planning that gets right down to the lot level. What this map shows is just one of the 13 watersheds that we're going to do this in. And what we did to figure out whether this plan could work, and we're basically going to make the city 10% more permeable over the course of the next 15 years, is to map all of the public infrastructure, all the new building permits, that's what all those little red dots are, and then project out and say, well, what do we think is going to happen out there in the world? Can we make this 10% goal so that we can convince the feds in the state that this is a better way to go? Ultimately, we were able to do that, and we just passed new stormwater regulations so that now if you're building something new in the city, you have to retain on your property 10 times more stormwater than you did if you had built it. And I'm sorry to say, if there's anybody in the room who is filing permits for something new anytime soon, but we've figured out some inexpensive ways for you to meet these requirements. Now, why does this matter? Well, dealing with this stormwater problem under the traditional gray infrastructure approach over the course of the next 20 years would have cost an additional $6 billion. Doing it with green infrastructure in this phased, adaptable way, as long as we're able to track it, measure it, and succeed, will cost $2.5 billion less. And so what that means is over the course of that timeline, and we won't be seeing the benefits for a while, which is why it's great to work for Mayor Bloomberg, New Yorkers will be seeing that in the form of lowered water rates, but also the whole scope of the cityscape is going to change. This is going to require thousands and thousands of installations. So what this really was for me was a backdoor way to put Henry Stern's Green Streets program on steroids. We basically were able to fund one of the things in Plan YC with DEP money that we really were going to have to write out of the budget. One of the things in Plan YC was to do another 100 green streets in certain areas, but now since we're going to make them green infrastructure that actually retains water, and the original plan for green streets, which we used to track week by week, they were just green, but they didn't actually capture any of the rainwater coming off the street. Now we're going to make them more robust, bigger, capture stormwater, and we get credit for capturing this stormwater, so we're meeting a regulatory mandate and beautifying and greening the cityscape. So to me, you know, there really isn't a better way to get the most bang for your tax buck. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on energy as a way to bring together that public safety, customer service, infrastructure, sustainability, and innovation, you know, those four key areas that I talked about as a way of looking at the city. Energy is something that I guess everybody controls and nobody controls. Everybody controls it in the sense that you can decide if your lights are on or off. The city is one of the biggest customers for energy. We don't actually run energy plants. Con Edison is private. The state regulates it through a bunch of different bodies. So it's kind of a spaghetti web of regulation. Why does the city care about it? Well, it's a big public safety issue. You got to make sure you have enough energy. This summer, just to give you an example, on July 22nd, despite the fact that everybody's been predicting, given the recession, that energy use would go down, we had a peak load day the highest peak load day of all time, where we went above 13,000 megawatts on July 22nd. Now, if you go back and read the newspaper headlines for how we did this summer, it will be Con Ed performs admirably, and it looks like the infrastructure is doing great. And that's true. I don't want to dispel that. That Kevin Burke, who runs Con Ed, is terrific, and they've made a lot of investments. But what that doesn't show is the extent to which the city had to bring its infrastructure off the grid and bring down the amount of energy we were consuming in order to keep the lights on. And so this is something that we are constantly watching and working with Con Ed on. What does it have to do with us? Well, demand reduction is something that is a core, energy use is a core city operation, and demand reduction is something that we've been working on citywide. So what we're trying to do basically is figure out a way where, if you have a peak load day coming, to be able to instantly reduce the city's overall citywide energy use by 50 megawatts. Huge reduction. Overall, citywide, we already have a program in place, including city agencies, to reduce by about 440 megawatts. But this is something that, over the long term, is going to determine whether or not the city has an adequate energy supply to provide those basic services. So there's a kind of operational element to this, and that's about every day. And that's why I made that joke about the weather at the beginning. Once June 1st comes, I'm looking at the temperature every single day, getting updates about what's happening at Con Ed, what's happening out there in the different in the boroughs and in the different community boards, to see whether we're having problems that could lead to the power going off at a nursing home or a hospital. These are just, kind of the rough and tumble of daily operations. Over the longer term, the question is, how are we going to ensure a clean, reliable, affordable energy supply to the city? This is where the mayor, in ways that are, direct and indirect, is bringing investments in that are really going to change the face of the next 20 to 30 years. Natural gas is a clean, it's not a renewable fuel, but it is a clean fossil fuel that really is going to be a stepping stone from those dirty fuels that we are currently using to renewable energy, water, wind, and solar. And in fact, the mayor just passed regulations that are going to eliminate number 6 and number 4 heating oil, which is only used in 10,000 buildings but produces enough particulate matter for more than all of the cars and trucks on the streets of the city combined a year. That's just by 10,000 buildings. So in order to make that regulation work, we need more natural gas. So the mayor, working with National Grid and Williams, we are doing the environmental review on a new natural gas pipeline coming through the Rockaways, and we're also supporting the Spectra pipeline coming in through New Jersey. There hasn't been new natural gas supply in this city in 40 years. Part of the reason for this is, people talk about wanting clean energy, but they don't like having to deal with the inconvenience of these investments going through city streets. What are they going to do? There are many government agencies that have to be coordinated. Oh, my gosh, it's unsafe. And so between the TBTA and the Port Authority and the City of New York and the State of New York, you have a collective action problem, let alone all the community groups that don't want it. Well, thanks to Mayor Bloomberg, we're overcoming that. So you're going to see, I think, hopefully turning on the gas before this mayor walks out, certainly in the Rockaways. Going to sustainability and staying in the energy frame, I mentioned about the number 4 and number 6 heating oils, and what this map shows is the density of particulate matter in the city and where air quality is the worst. What was so surprising about this when the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene did it was people were surprised to find that in what we would consider some of the highest per capita income areas of the city, the air quality is the worst. So how are we going to deal with this? Well, we are going to be providing new incentives for financing to do natural gas conversions. In fact, our goal here, and this is where long-term planning comes in, is to try to achieve 50% of the health benefits, which translates into 120 lives saved, of this elimination of this heating oil fuel by the time the mayor walks out. So how do we do that? Well, we have to coordinate with Con Edison, and the good news is from the time that we put this regulation in effect, we kind of move the market. The demand for natural gas installations has skyrocketed, which means that Con Ed has agreed to work with us to accelerate some of their capital funding for this. But in the fiscal area, and this getting back to our current fiscal constrained environment, we are going to be providing seed money for credit enhancements so that we can unlock hopefully up to $80 million of private sector financing, because these energy investments will pay back in 5 to 7 years. So one thing you can do and I know up here in this part of town there are actually a lot of buildings that are still using number 2, number 4, and number 6 gas. Figure out what boiler you have in your building and what it's burning. And let me give you my email. I'll give you my email address at the end, and we can tell you how we can help you be part of the first wave of conversions. But the great thing about this model is it's bringing private sector dollars to bear to help solve this problem that otherwise, frankly, unless we went to the combination of the regulation as a backstop, but how do you incentivize and get? The fact is most of the houses that are burning this oil are affordable housing or have other constraints that make these investments uneconomic unless you put these kinds of financing arrangements into play. Just wanted to touch on a couple of other energy-related things. The other things that we think about are what are the ways that we can change the rules so that we can have the city become more energy efficient, getting back to that reliability issue. And this just shows the Greener, Greater Buildings plan that we've put in place. And right now what we're doing is working with Bob in the Buildings Department, making sure that people do their energy retrofits and make the investments to make their buildings more efficient. And finally on energy, we're also going to be starting what's called Green Light New York, another public-private partnership to educate people about lighting conversions to efficient lighting. 32% of energy use in commercial buildings is from lighting. And so in the Surrogates Courthouse soon, we are going to open up for with Goldman Sachs and others contributing, and a very small amount of city tax levy dollars, an education center to teach people how to do this and help them figure out ways to make their buildings more efficient. Let's see. I think I've covered that. A couple other things to mention in terms of public-private partnerships. We are also working with National Grid, to actually take biogas, which we produce at our wastewater treatment plants. If people here have been to the Newtown Creek one with the giant eggs, we produce a lot of excess gas. We can clean that up and inject it and sell it into the grid. So it's another great example of a public-private partnership where we are using an asset that is certainly renewable. That plant processes about 300 million gallons of wastewater a day and can be converted into energy that is of really high quality. So none of these things, I think if I had to pick an area that I think we've made the most progress on in the last 2.5 years as far as sustainability goes, it probably would be in the energy area. And it's something that gets overlooked because it's not like there's the Department of Energy here in New York City, right? It's one of those areas where we pay a lot for it, we use a lot of it, but if you take the attitude that it's kind of not in my domain or not in my lane, those costs just keep going up. You look at it as an expense, but it turns out that if you can take a $100 million energy budget at DEP and cut it by 30%, that's a lot of operating money that you can either give back to taxpayers or use to improve water quality. Also, just want to mention solar. And this touches on Fresh Kills, which is going to become one of the signature parks of the, I think one of the things in the Bloomberg administration. I used to count at the Parks Department the number of acres that we would add to the Parks Department, and this was a job that the commissioner gave to me when I was his chief of staff. And we have added here between Brooklyn Bridge Park and Governor's Island and now Fresh Kills Park, hundreds and hundreds of acres of parkland. But how are we going to fund it? Well, one of the ways that we're looking to take advantage of this space is it's actually ideal for commercial-grade solar. You know, there are only 8 megawatts of solar power in New York City right now. And if we're going to have a real renewable strategy here, that needs to go up dramatically. And so soon we're going to be issuing an RFP to do 15 to 35 megawatts of solar at Fresh Kills, just on parts of it that are not going to be used for parkland. So it's another place where you wouldn't think that the city had a role to play, but it's taking advantage of a city asset for a purpose that can not only generate revenue, but overall lighten the load in terms of what the grid has to provide for New York City's energy needs. Last issue I want to touch on is solid waste. It's a subject that's near and dear to my heart, and because New York City produces about 11,000 tons of garbage a day. And right now we are only recycling or diverting from landfills about 15% of that. This chart tells the tale. In 2002, right after the 9/11 attacks, we suspended the recycling program. We went from 19% diversion, and I'll use recycling as a proxy for that. It really means diversion or any recycling or any other means of sending waste other than to a landfill. But we've never gotten back to 19%. Not only that, we got back to about 17%, and it's been sliding ever since. And Steve Cohen, who's here, I was on a panel that he asked me to be on, and he opened it up, I think, by saying that if you wanted to think of a less sustainable, less environmentally friendly, less economically sensible way to dispose of waste, it'd be hard to beat New York City. So, taking that to heart, when I came back to City Hall, and I was in Left Rack City at that point, I decided to take this on so that he could at least no longer say that. What the mayor has done is committed the city to doubling our diversion rate from 15% to 30% by 2017. This is going to be a huge effort, and I'm really just introducing it to you now because there's a lot more to come. But the way we're going to get there is through a combination of investments. Hang on for 1 second here. We're going to be investing in waste reduction and recycling infrastructure, improving access to reduction and recycling programs, and creating incentives and really reinventing the way we talk about recycling in New York City. Now, this just shows what the diversion rate is, and the residential and institutional is what we're talking about here, 15%. We really want to get that up to 30% and more. Why are we doing it now? Well, it's not only the right thing to do for the environment, but the reason the mayor was convinced to do it, even in these tough fiscal times, is that the economics have shifted. We spend $300 million a year just dumping stuff in the ground. And that price tag has only been going up. In fact, we now pay more to dispose of less than we did in 2006. And in my view, there's only so many more years that we are going to be able to send thousands and thousands of tons of trash to South Carolina and Pennsylvania. And at some point, it's going to become so prohibitively expensive that it's not going to be acceptable to raise taxes for the pure purpose of throwing garbage away. So the economics now work. In fact, we think that by increasing the amount that we divert from 15 to 30%, once we get close to that, we will be saving over today's cost $50 million in operating money because the cost of disposal is going to go down. We will be diverting 1 billion pounds of waste away from landfills to recycling or reuse. Now, as part of this, we're already investing in the infrastructure to do it. We're going to be reinstituting some composting, and one of the things we really have to look at is food waste. 17% of the waste stream is food waste. We really don't capture any of that. But we're also going to be reintroducing a new recycling campaign. Maybe some of you here can be part of our test cases for it. So, Esther, I'll be in touch with you to see if you have a class that's interested in helping us figure this out. Where is all this going to come from? Well, we're going to be investigating new conversion technologies, piloting new ways to convert waste to energy. But that's really only going to get us about 3 percentage points. The majority of this is going to come, like 10 to 12 points, from additional recycling and reuse. And that is really where we're going to be focusing our efforts. All this shows is where we want to move the needle from landfill to anything but in a landfill, either to reduction, and one of the best ways to divert waste is to use less. So this will try to be a combination of all of incentivizing all of that activity. This shows you where we think we're going to get the savings and the reduced tonnage from, the piloting conversion technology, improving waste reduction, and implementing institutional fees and so forth. We need to figure out ways to incentivize people to use less and recycle more. So I guess to sum it all up, I've talked, it's very difficult in a talk like this to cover everything, and so I've tried to focus on some areas that I think would be of interest to this group: energy, recycling and solid waste, sustainability. But the fact is that it really is a wonderful group of commissioners and dedicated people who work for the City of New York that make this place run every day. And I am just lucky enough to be able to work with them, and some of them actually listen to my point of view. So that's helpful. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take questions.
So if you wouldn't mind lining up over here, if you'd like to ask a question to Commissioner Holloway, he'd be happy to answer a few.
Hello, thank you. It was very interesting. My question is about green infrastructure. You mentioned that it's scalable and that new developments would be required to use it, but what are the incentives being considered for existing landowners to implement these new policies on their land? And then also, have you considered ecological, like habitat benefits that can be incorporated into those to improve available habitat within the city? And also, great job on the composting. I'm from San Francisco, and when I moved here, I was just so sad to put things in the trash that I knew were compostable. So.
Well, we haven't done a great job yet. So
right, but that you're
we're
going to.
We're not only thinking about it, but we are, and we're definitely going to make some progress there. So the answer is just to hit the issues that you said. What are the incentives for existing buildings? There is a tax abatement that is in place for green infrastructure. In other words, put a green roof on and you get a tax credit. But frankly, it's too complicated and not enough people are using it. So we're actually we're looking again at how could we incentivize without too big a revenue hit to the city, ways to convince people to put this on existing rooftops and so forth. However, you should know that the plan is based on what we can do with new development and public infrastructure in terms of reaching these targets, because that's the only way we could convince the federal and state regulators that we were serious. So what that means, bottom line, is everything beyond that is gravy. Now, we are trying to incentivize that. We actually were able to figure out a way to dedicate about $4 million a year so far, and I want that number to go up depending on how the proposals work out, to give grants to private buildings and to not-for-profits to put green infrastructure in the form of matching grants, and we've seen some great proposals. I'm not sure if Columbia has applied, but the New School has and some others, and so I think the application period might still be open. You can take a look on the web. But we definitely want to get the existing structures and private sector into the game. You also asked about ecological habitats. So the place where we're doing that the most is Staten Island. Another thing from my parks days, the Staten Island Blue Belt is a place where we have bought many acres of land and used natural features to deal with stormwater rather than putting in the massive sewer infrastructure that otherwise would be needed. This is not only more cost effective, it works. And people love it. In fact, we know that it's increased property values, for example, in Staten Island for places that are near green infrastructure. We're doing this in some places in other boroughs like Alley Pond Park in Queens. Some places in the city really are not conducive to it because we're 72% impermeable in this town, but we're working on it.
Cass, can you talk about, it's not unique to New York, but the scale of this problem is, and it seems a little silly at first, but the issue of food trucks, the pollution they cause, and in about another month we're going to see all the ice cream trucks scatter around the city, and they're up for 6 months a year, and they're idling literally on one block, use thousands of gallons of diesel cumulatively a week. And then you have the little carts that, you don't think about it, but they all have their own generators. And so I'm wondering, there's nothing green about it, there's nothing sustainable about it. What's sort of the administration's view of tackling this issue?
Couple things that we're doing. First of all, there is an anti-idling law that is in place, and I even have personally, even at almost personal danger to myself, knocked on windows and told people to turn off their cars. There was one guy who actually shut a bus door on me while I was telling him that he couldn't keep running his bus. Then he moved. But so we have an anti-idling law in place, and there is some enforcement that's going into that. We probably need to do that better. We are revamping the air code right now. New York City's air code has not been redone since, I think, 1972. Carter Strickland, the DEP commissioner, and the group there are, and that is covering everything from, certain the ways that emissions are done in restaurants and so forth to generators. And in fact, right now there's EPA standards that dictate the kinds of generators that can be used. And so we're working on ways that we can regulate more effectively, certainly like for Fashion Week. I don't know if you've noticed, but there are some events that have really big generators. Now, there are still small generators that are able to be used in some of these carts. If it's within emission standards, you're allowed to use that. We can always consider tightening those up more. But I do think that there's ultimately an enforcement question that we have to do and look at, what can we, is the technology good enough to impose stricter standards? So there's a lot that we're doing. I'd be happy to follow up with you.
Good evening, Commissioner. Here's my question. I'm a fourth-generation Staten Islander, and I know a lot about the history of Staten Island. And I hear a lot about sustainability, but if you look at our waterfront from the west of Staten Island along Richmond Terrace, for those people who don't know, that would be by the Staten Island ferry terminal, and then to the east of the ferry terminal. I hear a lot about sustainability, but I see nothing in respect to sustainable investment in the area of manufacturing. For years, what sustained Staten Island was the old school, blue-collar, heavy-duty, repetitive, messy manufacturing, Procter & Gamble, United States Gypsum, Bethlehem Steel. These outfits are long gone. How, while you are not the commissioner of business and related areas, how can you hook sustainability up into that?
We're actually doing a lot in this area. There is Amanda Burden, who runs the Department of City Planning. First, just to kind of note some of the things that the mayor and Amanda have done, really trying to lay the groundwork for what is this city going to look like in the next 10, 20, 30 years. There have been more than 100 rezoning more than a fifth of the city, a lot of that on the waterfront. So if you look at Coney Island, Willets Point, there has been some rezoning in Staten Island, and there's a proposed rezoning of Staten Island, I think, that is also in the works. But the fact is, you're right that we need to make the environment more friendly to try to bring some manufacturing back. Now, people will tell you that we're never going to see a return to that old school, I don't think New York City anytime soon is going to be the manufacturing town that it was. But there is a way for certainly new technology manufacturing and small-scale manufacturing for certain specialized things to happen. There is actually what Amanda is calling a green zoning set of regulations that we're looking at putting into effect that are going to look at the question of what kind of industrial uses should we be trying to incentivize and encourage, including Staten Island. What I'd like to do is, where's Margot? Margot's in there she is in the back. You should give your information to Margot, and what we can do is reach out to you, and at least we're going to be doing some focus groups on this, get you involved in the discussion, make sure that we cover the areas that you're talking about. I know it's an effort that I am actually somewhat directly involved in it, so we can follow up. But I think you're right.
Very good. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm in the Environmental Science and Policy program here at SIPA, and I've been looking at waste to energy, or we have been looking at waste to energy over the last year, and particularly now focusing on food waste. And so I'd really love to hear more about the city's plans for phasing in those technologies. Our understanding is that waste to energy is a very contentious issue in the city. There's a lot of public resistance to these facilities. So I guess specifically, are you considering what areas, what technologies, and then also are you working with the private sector on this?
To the last part, yes. Soon we're going to be issuing an RFP for a pilot for what we are calling waste energy / conversion technology that's going to be asking the marketplace to bring to us proposals to handle up to 450 tons a day of waste by converting that waste to energy. Now, 450 tons might sound like a lot, but the city actually generates 18,000 tons, 11,000 tons are residential and institutional. So this is really a drop in the bucket. But it's not. But we're excluding old school waste energy technology. Incineration will not be allowed. It will either have to be anaerobic digestion or one of the new. There's superheating technologies that are out there to do this, and you've investigated it, so I'm sure you know. And since it's not released yet, I don't want to go too deep into the details, but we have spent the last year doing research on the technologies, the environmental parameters that we want to establish. But I think it's important to note that you are right that this is a contentious issue. There are for two reasons. One is that there are many people who that when people say waste to energy, they think incineration, and they think back to the late 80s and early 90s when, as I'm sure Henry and other people in this room remember well, there were battles over whether we were going to do this, where these facilities were going to be placed, and there is an inequitable distribution not only of waste facilities but other industrial or municipal service facilities in neighborhoods that are low income or otherwise overburdened. And make no mistake, these facilities, whether it's a wastewater treatment plant or a waste energy facility or an asphalt plant, they have environmental impacts. And so it's going to be really important to ensure that whatever we do it in a way that's equitable or that meets environmental standards that are going to ensure you don't have long-term impacts. Now, there are some stakeholders or people who are we're kind of in those battles who would prefer that the city not even look into this, that we just say, you know what, we're not going to look at those kind of technologies. It's either recycling and reuse or landfill or large-scale composting. That's unrealistic. In a city this big with this many people, with how much waste we generate, there's going to be some irreducible amount of waste that is produced, and we have to do something with it. And it would be irresponsible from a public policy perspective not to investigate these technologies, particularly when you've got a mayor who I will put Mike Bloomberg's record up against anybody nationally, internationally, at the state or federal level in terms of making investments in sustainability and making sure we have the data to back it up. So you can be assured that under this administration we're going to take every precaution, but we're also not going to be not shy away from looking at a comprehensive solution to these problems. So I'm excited about what we're going to do, and I'm sure you'll follow up.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, thanks so much for speaking. Is the city looking at all to facilitate district energy, particularly thinking about cogeneration, especially in light of the conversion from dirty heating oil?
Yes, we are. Cogeneration is something that we are looking at, as particularly at our wastewater treatment plant. So at North River Wastewater Treatment Plant, where that's up at about 135th Street, we're looking at possibly producing 10 megawatts there. The Wards Island treatment plant, we've already had an RFP out to have the private sector help us do cogeneration investment. What's interesting is the gas infrastructure that's necessary to bring natural gas in is pretty congested. And so when I showed you those requests to Con Edison for the number of requests for natural gas connections, that have gone through the roof. It's going to take them a while to meet those without some assistance from us because their network is weak. They have not been investing in this area. Now, they've been making plenty of investments, but we're going to have to see a shift in the market and where now the market is going to drive, I think, a substantial amount of investment in this area. So we'll see where else we can do it. Now, there's also a bunch of private sector cogen. So at One Penn, and if you're aware of that, there's Vornado, and their sustainability director has done some really impressive stuff. I think that's a 3 or 6 megawatt thing, and we need to make it easier for the private sector to do that as well. So that's something that Bob and I are working on too.
Great, thanks.
Good afternoon. I saw NBAT listed on your agenda, but you didn't get to speak about it much. And so my question is about interagency cooperation and whether anything is being done to the structure of government to make sure that interagency cooperation is part of everyday government practice rather than a Bloomberg-specific initiative.
Well, and you know, this is where I had NBAT is the new business acceleration team, and what it focused on initially, it really was an enforcement initiative that we turned on its head and made a customer service initiative. As an enforcement initiative, there were some quality of life issues that were causing some major problems. I'm talking about illegal hotels, illegal conversions, illegal vending, counterfeiting. So we brought together the buildings department, the health department, the police department, and a couple of other agencies, and really made some progress in some certain areas. One day, Sherry Hyman, who's now running the Business Integrity Commission, said, you know, we might be able to have all these people together not just to stop bad activity, but to help facilitate good activity. These are all the people who need to approve permits or do inspections to open restaurants. And so we set it up to try to basically as a one-stop shop to make it easier to open a business. It was kind of forced agency cooperation. Right now, we've already opened about 600 restaurants under the NBAT model, and the data shows that we've cut 75 days off the time it takes to get a certificate of occupancy, which is great. How do we make that permanent? This is a big challenge. If we wanted to try to provide, and what Bob Steele, the Deputy Mayor for Economic Development, and I are working on, is how do we create a model that is going to be sustainable? You can't just bring a bunch of people from 10 different agencies and put them all in a room to focus on one specific stream of business. I mean, you can do it on a small scale, but if you want to deal with, if you want retail and restaurants and every kind of business that you're going to open to deal with it, you really need to figure out a way through technology like the hub for agencies to participate collectively remotely so that they can also deal with their other everyday business. Because what you don't want to happen is have really good service for this one area, and then every other indicator suffers, or you just stop keeping track. And so what we're trying to do is really decentralize this effort, but using technology, bring agencies together so that you can get the approvals all at the same time. So institutionalizing that, well, this is why Bob put his hub together. Agencies now all have their own rooms where they have to schedule and be present to review plans. It's a model that you're going to see more from. Well, I think we need to do more to do what you're suggesting, which is to institutionalize interagency cooperation. Just to note, there are a couple other areas where we've made a lot of progress. If you look at green infrastructure, which really requires not just DEP, which has some of the road, but this is really about DOT, the Parks Department, DDC. There is a green infrastructure task force that's been established and is now enshrined in an executive order to ensure that those investments continue, and we've made it part of the specs of basic infrastructure. So one of the ways that I think about this is how do you make this sustainability part of the DNA of the way New York City runs. And to do that, you really have to get it into the budgeting process and into the development process. It can't just be, something that the mayor's office says. People think that the mayor says it and it happens, and that's generally true. But, the mayor can only pay attention to so many things. And our job is to make the whole thing work better.
I had some parking tickets I wanted to ask you about. No,
sure.
One-time
exemption for it.
I wonder if you could expand a little bit on the issue of pensions that you touched upon early on. it's certainly not an issue that's unique to New York City. You're seeing it sort of play out in often unpleasant ways in the public and private sector around the country. The numbers you gave are quite staggering, and as you said, they're really not sustainable. So I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about what is the end game there? Is it just some working people, having to swallow some bitter medicine, or what happens?
Well, let me start by saying that a pension is an important benefit and to provide security for the municipal workforce, but for any workforce. I think at the time when the city's pension system was started, and from Tier 1 now to the proposed Tier 6, the world was a lot different. The defined benefit was the way that pension systems were initially built. In terms of the number of workers that were available to support any given pension, kind of like Social Security was that ratio was relatively high. The proportion of dollars produced to go to provide the benefits was relatively high. All of that is switched, and in the private sector now, you're seeing defined contribution and 401ks as the model, and there's a reason for that. That the employee needs to participate and have a major stake in ensuring that benefit is there at the end of. Now, there's some role and obligation I think that the employer has, but for reasons that really have to do with the structure of certainly city government, this is a very hard system to change. If you are Chrysler or GM or Bristol or name the company, you have to deal with the unions and you have the board, but there's a fundamental understanding. You can see the bottom line. I mean, the company is either going to go bankrupt or not. In New York City, pensions are a matter of state law. They are not bargainable. They used to be, but they are not bargainable anymore. And what that means is when you sit down, and neither is health care, by the way, as an individual matter. It's really bargained collectively with a group called the Municipal Labor Council. So when you sit down with a union to negotiate their wages and benefits, you're not looking at the whole picture. You're talking about their wages, and maybe you get a health care thing, but pensions are totally separate, and the state legislature, which is one level removed from directly having to pay for it, there's what you call a classic small A agency problem, right? Easy to give out benefits if you're not on the hook. So this is really difficult to change. Not only that, but the state constitution prohibits the diminishment of benefits. That's why we always talk about this in terms of new entrants into the system, and the savings from that doesn't even start to accrue until 10 or 20 years, even though your assumptions can change. So I think those structural things make it uniquely difficult in city and state government to fix this problem, which is why it is taking the extraordinary commitment of the mayor and the governor primarily to try to get this done. How is it going to happen? Well, I think it's going to take there's something's going to have to give, and we'll have to see how this ultimately plays out. I think there is an understanding out there that there's going to be changes. The question is, how far will we go? It is probably the single biggest, fiscal issue that we face. So that's some answer, but I don't know totally.
Well, thanks anyway for the exemption on those parking tickets.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Pearl Gray. It's a pleasure to hear you speak again. We're doing a lot of work on the macro level for greenhouse gas emission reduction, and so as sort of like universities and hospitals are decreasing their emissions, we're going to need more information at a higher resolution, but it doesn't seem like Con Ed and National Grid are set up to sort of disaggregate that information. Is there any talks with sort of altering their infrastructure to be able to do that, like handle millions of individual emissions reductions? And what sort of incentives can the city give to the organizations to do that?
Well, the smart grid technology is something that Con Ed has been a little slow to implement, and they have certainly done it on a pilot scale, but they have not done it in a across-the-board way. We've kind of had conversations, and I've been part of them with Con Ed to try to provide that additional transparency. I think the technology is also getting better, and so we'll see. I think hearing from customers and hearing from groups and people like you that this is a priority in a sustained way is going to help. But if you have specific ideas, talk to Margot, give your contact information, and we'll follow up because I would love to hear them.
Great. Thank you.
I think, Henry, did you want to? I've been afraid of this.
Very gentle about it. I think we've had a very valuable session here, and we know a lot of the problems, a lot more of the problems, and we know that the city is putting a great deal of energy and money into remediation and the environment, and this is terrific. But the city has elections every 4 years, and what assurance is there that the next administration will have the attitude that this one did? And I've been through a dozen DEP commissioners in my time in city government. Some of them are better, some of them are worse. This, in my opinion, this is a golden age for your agency, but they're often followed by brass ages, stone ages. So where do you go from here after somebody cuts a deal with a Brooklyn district leader not to put a facility in his neighborhood?
Well, I think that this is the question, probably the most important question of the moment. How do we ensure? And by the way, I think it's important to say there's a lot I haven't talked about here in terms of public safety and education and all those things, and they're critically important, and it's a balancing of resources. But this question of how do we ensure that this stuff, it's very easy to undo things, cut deals, pay lip service to something and then go do something else. I think the only way that is going to be avoided is if the next mayor, our successors, and then even their successors know that it's not going to be politically tenable to stop or backtrack on this. It is fundamentally a political question. The technology is there, the brain power is there, the possibility of making the investments. And by the way, in most cases, and this is what I've focused on, whether it's green infrastructure or recycling, the economics case is there to make these investments. And in this time, that's probably the most important argument to make because dollars are scarce. But unless there is sustained action and unless it becomes something that the candidates in the upcoming election have to be asked point blank and address, what are you going to do to continue this or that? Then I think you're right. I think it's a huge risk, and that's why apathy, I think, is really dangerous, and that's why maybe we are, I would say, right now in a fairly good place, even though I wouldn't characterize things as good, certainly financially. But don't be complacent. Don't think that because the way that things are and the focus of this administration is what it is, that's the way it's always been. The city always hasn't had historically low crime. We haven't always had control of the schools, and we certainly haven't always had what some people think of as a fairly enlightened public policy towards these issues, looking at these investments as good economics as well. So doing that, and I think that just means get involved and be engaged and listen to what the candidates are saying, because it's going to be very easy. If there's going to be you can be assured that there's going to be a small, narrow group of people who have a fairly narrow set of interests who are going to be very, very engaged in who the next mayor is. The question is, will you be engaged? Does that include you? It should, and I think that but it's fundamentally a political question.
Yes, and for example, just one thing: in the last administration, I was free to go to schools throughout the country and hire the finest young people we were able to reach and try to persuade them to go into city government, and many of them did. We have almost been yes, the most prominent Deputy Mayor Skyler was the most prominent case before your advent, but even he was very helpful because he was the one who got you to come back into government after you had been in the private sector for a while. But, I mean, it's an attitude. It's the idea. Oh, my goodness, so many people here. You know, that this is possible. This is a real, these are wonderful places to work if you're doing a good job. This is the most important public business that can be undertaken. And you almost need a campaign to get people to do it, because I don't think you're going to have anybody in this next election who is going to be spending $100 million in order to get the most qualified candidates to run for any office. So,
well, on that note,
yeah, okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Caswell Holloway, for a fantastic talk, for giving us a glimpse of what it takes to make New York City such a spectacular place to live. It's really important to institutions like Columbia that the work that the mayor and the deputy mayor and all of the commissioners do happens to make New York a place that students want to come, that faculty want to come. That helps make Columbia better, and it makes all our lives that much easier. So thank you very much, Kaz, for coming and joining us and sharing some time with us. And I would like to invite everyone to join us for a reception in the space just outside. Thanks very much.